Tyler Perry quietly stepped into a luxury car dealership. To him, it was just an ordinary day. But what was about to happen would change everything, and when the truth about him came to light, the consequences would be more shocking than anyone could imagine. Unforgettable. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we have another special story just for you. The autumn air in Atlanta, Georgia, carried a crispness that made the city feel alive. The streets bustled with people heading to work, coffee in hand, the scent of roasted beans mixing with the distant aroma of freshly baked biscuits from local diners. The Buckhead district, known for its high-end boutiques and luxury car dealerships, shimmered in the morning sun. Walking through these streets, blending into the crowd, was Tyler Perry. Dressed in dark jeans, a simple leather jacket, and a fitted cap pulled low, he moved with an ease that was almost contradictory to his success. He had built an empire, one that stretched from Hollywood to Atlanta, touching lives through film, television, and philanthropy. But despite his wealth and influence, Tyler had never lost touch with his roots. He didn't care for extravagance. He valued authenticity. That morning, he had one goal in mind. For months, Tyler had been searching for something special, a classic car he could restore and use for charity. He envisioned auctioning it off, with the proceeds going toward youth education programs in underserved communities. He didn't need a flashy ride for himself. He wanted something with history, something that carried a story. A friend had mentioned a high-end car dealership in Atlanta, known for housing some of the rarest vintage automobiles in the country. It was exclusive, catering only to a particular kind of clientele, those who draped themselves in designer brands and flaunted their wealth. Tyler wasn't concerned about that. He was here for the car, not the spectacle. As he approached the dealership, its sleek glass facade reflected the city skyline. Inside, the showroom was a world of opulence. Polished floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and the walls were lined with some of the most expensive cars money could buy. The air smelled of fine leather and expensive cologne, a scent that seemed almost curated to remind visitors they were in the presence of luxury. Tyler stepped in, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. He moved slowly, taking in the beauty of the vehicles, but it didn't take long before he spotted what he was looking for. At the back of the showroom sat a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1, a masterpiece of American muscle, a car that had defined an era of raw power and craftsmanship. Midnight black, with a glossy finish that reflected the soft lights above, it was a relic of speed and precision. Tyler's eyes lingered on it. This was it. This was the one. He approached a salesman who stood nearby, scrolling through his phone. The young man barely looked up before muttering, "Give me a second. I'll find someone for you." Without waiting for a response, he walked away. Tyler exhaled lightly, his expression unreadable. He had been in situations like this before, times when people looked at him but didn't see him. It didn't bother him. He was used to it. Instead, he remained where he was, running his fingers along the smooth body of the Camaro, appreciating the details, the craftsmanship, the legacy it carried. Behind him, whispers stirred. "Who is that guy?" one employee murmured. "I don't think he belongs here," another replied. "Probably just here to look, not to buy." Tyler heard them but didn't react. He simply continued studying the car, feeling the weight of their assumptions settle in the room like an unspoken challenge. Then the manager arrived. Richard Calloway, a man in his mid-40s with a sharp suit and an even sharper attitude, strode toward Tyler. His walk carried the kind of confidence that came from years of selling luxury to the elite, and the kind of arrogance that came from deciding who did or didn't belong in that world. "That's quite the car you're admiring," Richard said, his voice smooth but edged with something else. Tyler turned to him, offering a polite nod. "Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of history." Richard crossed his arms, glancing over Tyler's attire, his eyes flicking from the worn leather jacket to the scuffed boots. "This model is exclusive. Very rare," Richard added, his tone carrying a quiet test. Tyler smiled slightly. "That's exactly why I'm interested." Richard studied him for a moment longer before raising an eyebrow. "I hope you realize this isn't just any car. And this particular model is one of the most expensive vintage Camaros available in the country. Tyler met his gaze without hesitation. I figured as much. Richard let out a dry chuckle. He took a slow step forward, lowering his voice just enough to make it clear that he wasn't just making small talk. Look, I don't mean to be rude, but models like this attract a certain kind of buyer. People who appreciate the finer things, who understand what they're getting into. And, with all due respect, he gestured vaguely toward Tyler's clothing. You don't exactly fit the profile. A heavy silence fell between them. Tyler tilted his head slightly, studying the man before him. He had met men like Richard before, people who assumed that success had a uniform, that wealth had a single look. Interesting, Tyler finally said, his voice calm. You seem to think you can tell a lot about a man just by his clothes, but that says more about you than it does about me. Richard's smile tightened. He took another step forward, his stance more rigid now, as if he needed to assert dominance. Listen, I see guys like you all the time. You walk in, take a few pictures, pretend for a moment that you belong in this world, and then you leave. So, let's not waste time. Are you actually serious about buying this car, or are you just here to dream? Tyler's expression remained unreadable, but something in the air shifted. He took a slow breath before speaking. What if I'm not here to dream? Richard scoffed, shaking his head. Then I'd say you're in the wrong place. Because this dealership is for people who can actually afford what they're looking at. The tension in the room thickened. Employees had stopped pretending not to listen. Customers who had been browsing moments ago now stood frozen, watching the exchange unfold. Tyler studied Richard for a moment longer before finally offering a small, knowing smile. Funny thing about respect, he said, his voice unwavering. It doesn't cost a thing. But for some people, it seems harder to find than any car in this showroom. Richard's expression flickered, caught between frustration and disbelief. His jaw clenched. And then, in one reckless moment, he lunged, his fist clenched, his temper flaring. But Tyler was faster. With the reflexes of someone who had spent a lifetime handling high-pressure situations, he caught Richard's wrist midair. The impact of the moment sent a shockwave through the room. Silence. All eyes locked onto them, disbelief washing over the faces of every witness. Tyler didn't tighten his grip, didn't push back. He simply held Richard's wrist, steady but firm, before speaking in a voice so even, so composed, that it made the moment feel even heavier. The anger you're feeling has nothing to do with me. Maybe you should think about where it's really coming from before you take it out on other people. Richard stood there, his pride crumbling under the weight of his own actions. Tyler slowly released his grip, adjusted his jacket, and took a step back. Then he turned toward the exit. The only sound in the room was the slow, steady echo of his footsteps on the polished floor. And then, a young man in the corner, unnoticed until now, raised his phone. He had recorded everything, and the world was about to see it all. As Tyler Perry stepped out of the dealership, the weight of the encounter lingered in the air. Inside, the stunned silence was almost deafening. Employees frozen in place, unsure how to process what had just happened. But outside, the world moved on. Cars zipped down the street. People hurried past, unaware that something monumental had just taken place. Tyler took a slow breath, adjusting his jacket as he walked toward the curb, but before he could take another step, a voice called out from behind. "Mr. Perry." It was the young man with the phone, the one who had recorded everything. He jogged up, breathless, his hands gripping his device as if it held something sacred. "I got it all. The whole thing. People need to see this." Tyler looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "And what exactly do you think they'll see?" he asked calmly. The young man hesitated, then looked down at his screen. "They'll see the truth, the way he treated you, the way you handled it. That kind of arrogance. People need to know." Tyler exhaled, eyes flicking up toward the sky, the Atlanta sun bright against the crisp air. He had never been one for public drama, never sought to humiliate anyone, but something about this moment felt different. This wasn't about him. It was about something bigger, something that happened to people every single day, just without cameras rolling. The video went live within the hour. At first, it was just another post in the endless scroll of social media, a clip tucked between celebrity gossip and political debates. But something about it struck a nerve. Within minutes, comments flooded in. Unbelievable. How do people still think they can get away with this? The way he kept his composure. Absolute class. Money doesn't buy respect, and that manager just found out the hard way. The clip gained traction, spreading like wildfire. Within hours, news outlets picked it up, blogs dissected it, and the public backlash began. Inside the dealership, Richard Calloway was spiraling. His phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications flashing across the screen, headlines forming faster than he could read them. Luxury car dealer under fire for discriminatory treatment of Tyler Perry. Viral video exposes classism in high-end auto industry. Respect costs nothing, but some still can't afford it. Employees whispered behind his back, customers canceled appointments, and the dealership's inbox overflowed with demands for an apology. The damage was immediate and irreparable. The dealership's owners, who had once given Richard free rein, now saw him as a liability. Meanwhile, Tyler remained silent. He had no interest in feeding the fire, but the world wasn't waiting for his response. Journalists called for statements, television networks requested interviews, but he turned them all down. Instead, he focused on what he had always done: his work, his philanthropy, his storytelling. But even as he tried to move forward, the story refused to fade. Public opinion had taken over, and there was no rewinding it now. Days passed, and the impact deepened. The dealership's reputation crumbled, boycotts spread, and the backlash grew louder. Then, just when it seemed things couldn't escalate further, Richard Calloway was fired. The announcement came in the form of a brief, sterile press release. Effective immediately, Richard Calloway is no longer associated with our organization. We do not condone the behavior depicted in recent footage and remain committed to treating all customers with dignity and respect. It was a corporate cleanup, a desperate attempt at damage control. But, for Richard, it was too late. With nowhere else to go, he found himself sitting alone in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. The man who had once stood at the top of the luxury car market was now reduced to a cautionary tale. His arrogance, his own undoing. He stared at his reflection in the glass, the weight of his choices settling in. He had miscalculated, badly. Meanwhile, Tyler Perry had made a decision of his own. The Camaro, the very car that had started it all, was still on his mind. He had never been one to hold grudges, and he wasn't about to start now. He reached out to another dealership, one that had built a reputation not just for high-end cars, but for its commitment to customer service and inclusivity. West Side Classic Autos, a family-owned business known for treating every customer with the same level of respect, regardless of their bank account. The moment he stepped through their doors, the difference was immediate. There were no whispers, no judgmental stares, no condescending tones. Instead, he was met with a warm greeting from the owner himself, Sam Whitaker, an older man with silver hair and a firm handshake. "Welcome in. What can we do for you today?" Tyler glanced around, then smiled. "I'm looking for something special, and I think you might be able to help me." Within minutes, Sam and his team walked Tyler through their collection, treating him like any other customer. No assumptions, no pretenses, just mutual respect. And then, tucked in the back of the showroom, he saw it. Another 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1, identical to the one he had seen before. But this time, it wasn't overshadowed by arrogance or exclusion. It was simply a car, a machine with history, waiting for its next chapter. Tyler placed a hand on the hood, running his fingers across the smooth paint. "I'll take it," he said without hesitation. Sam nodded. No sales pitch needed. "Good choice," he said simply. The deal was done, and as Tyler signed the final papers, the feeling in his chest wasn't one of victory, but of something more profound. A quiet reaffirmation that dignity mattered more than dollars. Later that evening, he posted a simple message on social media, accompanied by a photo of him standing beside the Camaro, shaking hands with Sam. The caption read, "True luxury isn't about price tags. It's about respect. Thanks to Westside Classic Autos for reminding me of that." The internet exploded once again, but this time the narrative had shifted. The focus was no longer on the disgrace of one dealership, but on the integrity of another. People flooded to Westside Classic Autos, praising them for their approach, pledging their support. Meanwhile, the former dealership continued to sink, drowning in the consequences of its own mistakes. But Tyler wasn't done. The car wasn't just a purchase, it was a statement. He had plans for it, something bigger than just owning it. He had already reached out to a charity, arranging for the Camaro to be auctioned off, with every penny going toward funding creative arts programs for underprivileged youth. "Let's turn something negative into something that actually helps people," he had told a close friend. "That's the only way any of this matters." And so, the story that had begun in a moment of prejudice and arrogance had transformed into something entirely different. The car that was once a symbol of exclusion had now become a vehicle for change. But more than that, it had proven a point that needed to be said out loud. Respect isn't a privilege, it's a right. And those who fail to recognize that will always lose in the end. The auction was set for the following month, a highly publicized event in downtown Atlanta that quickly drew attention far beyond the city. The Camaro that had sparked controversy was now a symbol of change, its purpose no longer about ownership, but about impact. The proceeds from its sale would directly fund arts education programs for underprivileged kids, an initiative close to Tyler Perry's heart. As the event approached, the anticipation grew, not just for the car, but for what it represented. On the night of the auction, the venue buzzed with excitement. Celebrities, business leaders, philanthropists, and everyday supporters gathered in a grand hall, its walls lined with images of young artists, musicians, and performers whose futures would be shaped by the funds raised that night. Tyler stood in the crowd, dressed in his signature understated style, observing rather than taking center stage. He had never been one for unnecessary spectacle. He had done what he set out to do, turn a negative experience into something meaningful. As the Camaro was rolled onto the platform, a hush settled over the audience, followed by murmurs of admiration. The auctioneer took the stage, his voice steady as he introduced the car, not just for its mechanical beauty, but for its newfound purpose. The bidding started high and climbed rapidly, numbers flashing on the screen as determined buyers pushed the price higher and higher. Within minutes, it had exceeded expectations. The room held its breath as the final bid landed at an astounding $2.3 million, an amount that far surpassed anything Tyler had imagined. A round of applause erupted, cheers filling the hall as the gavel came down. The winning bidder, a well-known entrepreneur passionate about philanthropy, made his way to the stage, shaking hands with Tyler as cameras flashed. "This is more than just a car," the man said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the room. "This is about respect, opportunity, and making sure the next generation knows that their dreams matter." Tyler nodded, his gratitude evident, but he kept his response simple. "The real value here isn't in the metal, the engine, or the name on the title. It's in what this money will do. That's what really matters." As the event wound down, Tyler stepped away from the crowd, taking a quiet moment outside the venue. The city lights shimmered in the distance, the hum of traffic and late-night conversations filling the air. He exhaled slowly, thinking about how a single moment of disrespect had spiraled into something so much larger. The world had seen the footage, had witnessed the arrogance of one man and the way people responded to it. But more importantly, they had seen what could happen when an injustice was turned into action. This wasn't about one dealership or one individual. It was about changing the way people viewed dignity and worth. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Calloway watched from a bar stool, his face partially illuminated by the glow of his phone. The event was being streamed live, headlines scrolling across the screen. He read the numbers, saw the reactions, watched as the car he had once used to judge another man had now been transformed into a symbol of generosity and change. His grip tightened around his glass, a bitter taste settling in his mouth. The dealership had severed ties with him, and his attempts to move on had been met with rejection at every turn. His name was now synonymous with elitism, arrogance, and public disgrace. For the first time, he truly understood the weight of his actions. He had spent years believing that wealth and status dictated respect, that the people who walked through his showroom doors had to look a certain way to deserve acknowledgement. He had been wrong. He had been so focused on keeping people out that he had never realized the cost of such an attitude. He finished his drink, set the glass down, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't before, the quiet, unsettling sting of regret. The next morning, Tyler received an unexpected email. It was from Richard. No excuses, no justifications, just a simple apology. "I was wrong. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I've learned something from all of this." Tyler read the message twice before closing his laptop. He didn't need Richard's apology, but he understood its importance. Change didn't happen overnight, and sometimes it took falling hard to see clearly. As weeks passed, the story slowly faded from headlines, but its impact remained. The dealership that had once dismissed him saw a sharp decline in business, struggling to repair its image. Meanwhile, Westside Classic Autos, the dealership that had treated him with respect, saw an overwhelming surge in customers, people who appreciated not just the cars, but the values they upheld. The hashtag number "Respect is Luxury" continued to trend, sparking conversations in business spaces across the country. Companies began reevaluating their customer service policies, and stories of similar incidents began surfacing. People who had been underestimated, dismissed, judged too soon. One evening, as Tyler sat in his office, a news segment caught his attention. It was an interview with a young artist, one of the many who had benefited from the auction's proceeds. The girl, no older than 15, spoke about how she had always dreamed of becoming a filmmaker but had never had access to the right tools, the right mentorship. "Because of this program," she said, "I get to tell my stories, and maybe one day someone will see them and feel like they matter too." Tyler leaned back in his chair, a slow smile forming. This was the real victory. Not the headlines, not the social media frenzy, not even the moment in the dealership, but the ripple effect of choosing action over anger. A lesson that had started with a car had now become something much greater. In the end, it wasn't about money. It wasn't even about proving a point. It was about making sure that respect, once lost, found its way back into the world.